Hey, I wanted to make a video, it being near the end of 2025, making a set of predictions, five predictions for AI in 2026, and focused on kind of like the landscape around AI and what I think is likely to happen. These get kind of increasingly hot. So without further ado, I think the first of these is that there's going to be some pretty massive churn of publicly traded companies around AI in 2026. I think that 2026 is the year that a lot of the quote bills come due, in that companies made various bets around AI. Those bets were kind of sponsored by various executives, and I think that 2026 is the year that those executives and those companies are going to be held to account, rightly or wrongly, for their bets around AI. That is not to say that I think like the bubble is popping. I don't believe that at all. But what I think it means is that um, companies are not necessarily on net doing a great job at innovate, like publicly traded companies are not doing a great job on net reinventing themselves with AI. And I think that that's going to turn into, because of the huge capex cost in terms of GPUs, but also a big opex cost as well. I think that's going to turn into churn for those companies and execs. Is they're just not seeing the ROI. Their boards will say that they're not seeing the ROI, and they'll mandate changes. And I think that even with some breakout successes in AI, you still will see a lot of this because um, some companies will look at the space. They think they can't be competitive around AI, and they'll just retreat from AI. Some other companies will think that they had too much of an in-house strategy and needed more of an outsourced strategy, or vice versa. Or some companies will think that they backed their own house. They were betting on Microsoft, but they should have bet on Google, stuff like that. Or they bet on OpenAI, but they should have bet on Anthropic. And so I think that 2026 is going to be the year of a lot of that kind of house cleaning and a lot of really big changes in the strategies and publicly traded Fortune 500 companies around AI, and a lot of churn of executives as a result of it. Prediction number two. I think that continued AI acceleration and coding assistance will start to disrupt adjacent areas with specific tooling in areas like product management, DevOps, and product analytics. This is a little bit of a self serving one because I'm building a product management AI tool. But you look at one of the areas where AI has made massive inroads, that being coding assistance. And I think that folks in those, I think the organizations in those adjacent areas are already being disrupted by it, especially in product. And they're being disrupted by it because their relation to software engineering has changed as a result of vibe coding. Um, they're also being disrupted by it because of kind of like the art of the possible. They can see ways of working that they didn't know were available to themselves before. Things like PMs can now vibe code up a prototype. That was an available option before. Um, and I think with that massive disruption, you're going to see tools that more specifically target that space and kind of accelerate the disruption in these adjacent spaces. It could take the form of the tools like Lovable and Replit, kind of end up becoming the PM type prototyping tools. And those kind of sit alongside the IDE coding first tools like Claude Code, Cursor, Windsurf, Anti Gravity, etc. Maybe that's how it plays out. Hard to know. But I think that um, we're going to see more tools that specifically target the kind of the penumbra around AI coding tools. And I think it's going to be disruptive pretty markedly to those adjacent disciplines. Third prediction. Um, I think the 2.0, what I'm going to call the 2.0 generation of AI orchestration tooling, is going to occur. I think there's going to be a bit of a movement away from these kind of fleet of agent systems like LaneChain, N8N, etc. Spec out a set of kind of human type jobs and then give a prompt to each of those human type jobs that is a quote agent. I think we're going to move away from that to a degree towards what I'm going to call more of a first class context management system. And I think the inspiration for that is going to be the kinds of context management that occurs behind the scenes in AI based coding tools, IDEs, and Cloud Code. Um, those don't primarily look like here's a human like agent that does X, here's a human like agent that does Y, Z, and they work on a team together. Although Cloud Code obviously has sub agents, but that's not the main part of their context management architecture. I think that the context management architecture, which is about how context gets passed along, kind of like the pipeline, the strategies for compacting it and representing it, the strategies for pulling information, which can be RAG like or not RAG like, I think that those formulas are going to start kind of like percolating into the tool space so that other folks can kind of configure these experiences for themselves without having to reinvent it from scratch. I think that would also kind of imply that some of the capabilities that are behind the scenes get even more reduced to practice because to some degree, whether you're OpenAI or Anthropic or Cursor, you've done the things behind the scenes that just happen to work for most people. But I think that there's going to be enough reinforcement learning against data on the back end. There's going to be enough other places where those providers see abstractions that they can start to kind of harden and optimize around those abstractions, and then those abstractions are going to find themselves into tools that allow other people to build context engineering from scratch relatively readily. Um, Fourth prediction, I think e-commerce is going to be pretty massively disrupted in 2026, and I think it might be specifically Shopify that does it. But I've been thinking this for a little while, and I think the time is now kind of ripe. I think that um, AI disrupting e-commerce is kind of easy to envision just based on margin. Like you can build an AI automated experience that provides e-commerce capabilities, and that's going to disrupt incumbents on margin. I mean, that's not that's not hard to see. What I think is a little bit harder to see is providing e-commerce that's going to be meaningfully differentiated from the incumbents in some way. And I think that that's the kind of shift that might be a little bit less obvious to people. But if you really look at e-commerce, um, I don't always like Cory Doctor's word of enshittification, but there's been some enshittification in e-commerce where um, you have these marketplace providers that kind of set up to be peer-to-peer marketplace providers, um, and they have slowly and gradually on the back end have kind of moved a lot of that towards sourcing a lot of their quote marketplace offerings with um, factory based goods from low labor cost countries, and even that's even applied to Etsy, and Etsy's kind of like the poster child for this kind of like vibrant creator led peer to peer place marketplace, and even they have kind of done this move towards like kind of cross border traffic to try to make their margins good, and to make their supply good as well. And I think that that means that those incumbents are disruptible by somebody who can come along and figure out how to use AI orchestration and automation to create a delightful experience for customers. Now, e-commerce and delight, I haven't used in the same sentence for a little while, but you can start to see how it would happen. And in my mind, if you look back at like the early history being 2.5 years ago, of how LLMs were kind of like rolled out in the corporate space, a lot of it was to try to reduce cost centers. In this case, it would be the contact centers. And I think this ended up rubbing a lot of customers the wrong way because they were just not getting as good of an experience as they would get from a human talking to an agent to try to solve problems, etc. And the technology was less developed then than it is now. So, um, somebody who's clever, and I think this might end up being Shopify, might be the clever party in this case, can figure out how to do automated e commerce with a human face. And if you think about the Shopify business model, it actually works super well for this because Shopify, one of their main offerings is stores. So Shopify provides a proprietor a store which is a set of selling capabilities that can be automated to an ever increasing degree with AI, and the owner of that store gets to provide the human face for it. And they can phase that store owner can phase in as much human facing, customer facing AI as they want to phase in. Um, and I think that that might start to like really kind of erode away at the incumbent position of established e-commerce companies because folks who are engaging in marketplace e-commerce probably aren't seeing the customers are just maybe not seeing the value that they used to see 5 years ago. Um, the final prediction is that I think OpenAI will make a major move. And this is like the hottest take of all of these. I almost didn't include it in because it didn't seem how feasible this could be because of how big the move would have to be. But I think they'll make a major move of either an acquisition or getting themselves acquired, which is the hottest part of this hot take because at a possible 500 billion market cap, who could possibly acquire OpenAI? Um, but OpenAI is probably starting to see that they are getting boxed out of their um, leadership in B2B by Anthropic and Google. And they see that their probably biggest advantage is on their incredibly large user base. And they see that they've been making tons of bets in that space as well. Um, but they don't really have like the leadership and say like coding vibe coding tools that Anthropic has gotten to at this point or Google is going to get to at some point in the near term. And I think like OpenAI is going to kind of like read the tea leaves a little bit and say we need to really kind of focus on the consumer space and we need a big acquisition of some sort to make that work to kind of keep the moat with consumers. And if not for the size of the transaction, I actually think it would make more sense for them to get themselves acquired. But um, when you're talking about a possible $500 billion market cap, it's almost impossible to see that. Um, I think that they'd probably end up with like a little bit of a down round, and it wouldn't be 500 billion; it would be more like 300 billion. But even so, it's gigantic. Um, Apple could, in theory, do it, but Apple is both because has needed to make moves in AI, but Apple is both dramatically risk averse as well as they just did their deal with Google to bring Gemini to Siri. And Apple, you can kind of just look and see that Apple um, doesn't really see. This might be because of Apple Intelligence not panning out to the way that it was supposed to pan out, but they don't really see a percentage in a way that they want to make big bets around on kind of like back end AI. They see AI as like ways of kind of keeping consumers, and so it's consumer facing AI. And if there's not a move to be made at present with Siri, then there's no move to be made, I guess. But I think that like the logic is going to dictate that OpenAI will get increasingly desperate to figure out how to like kind of deepen and extract more value from their moat. And they they have this weird like incredible leader position in user-based consumer-based AI, but they are so kind of boxed in by everybody else. I mean, they are boxed in the B2B space by Anthropic and Google, as I mentioned. um, they don't own as much of their own compute as Google does. I'm sure that they will kind of keep their AI experience more popular for consumers than Google will, just given Google and consumer isn't always like the most natural fit. But like um, OpenAI is making impressive, they're making impressive progress. I mean, at the same time, they're quite like boxed in from every dimension, and so in turn, that kind of tells me that they're going to look for increasingly more dramatic moves to try to. Um, to try to submit their consumer position or even make an exit for the company. And again, like who can acquire a company at 500 billion market cap? I don't think that's exactly how it would pan out, but they've got to be thinking about um, how they can kind of thrive in the consumer space, and they've got to be kind of thinking along these lines in some way, I would imagine. So yeah, those are my five hot take predictions for 2026, and maybe in a year we'll come back and see what these looked like. Hey, this is Kyle Grove with Cutline signing off. I want to thank you once again for kind of like the support for the channel, and greatly appreciate it. Thank you for all your support. Bye for now.